I came home from a plumbing job to find Caroline Westfield's bulldozers destroying my dead wife's memorial garden. Construction crews scattered across my land like they owned the place, crushing Sarah's David Austin roses under steel treads. Before I could even process what was happening, this blonde woman in white designer heels approached with fake concern. "Danny, we're building something absolutely beautiful that'll increase your property value significantly," she said, sweet as sugar. I watched them destroy 18 months of Sarah's careful work in 18 minutes. "This is my land," I said. She waved some papers dismissively. "Well, technically, it's community space per the old survey. Don't worry, we'll compensate you fairly for the inconvenience." $3,000 for the spot where my wife had fought cancer and won twice. That's when I smiled and said, "You know what, Caroline? Go ahead and finish your beautiful clubhouse." What would you do if your HOA destroyed your memorial garden? Because what happened next made Caroline wish she'd never heard my name. My name's Danny Kowalski, and 18 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was learning to cook dinner for my daughter Emma without burning down the kitchen. Sarah, my wife of 22 years, had just lost her battle with breast cancer. The medical bills had nearly wiped us out, but we still had our little house in Meadowbrook Estates, North Carolina. Sarah loved that house, especially the backyard, where she'd planted a memorial rose garden during her recovery. David Austin roses, her favorites. The smell of those blooms on summer mornings could transport you straight to an English countryside. She'd sit out there for hours, planning which varieties to add next spring. I'm a union plumber by trade, 48 years old, and I run a small demolition business on the side. Nothing fancy, just me, my excavator, and whatever jobs I can pick up around town. The sound of my work boots on the gravel driveway at 5:30 every morning had become Emma's alarm clock. She'd complain, but I caught her smiling sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. The thing about me is, I document everything. 25 years of plumbing work taught me that people's memories get real creative when money's involved. I carry a professional camera everywhere, take time-stamped photos of every job site, keep detailed work logs in numbered notebooks. Sarah used to tease me about it, called me her obsessive documentarian. That obsession was about to save my life. Enter Caroline Westfield, our HOA president. 52 years old, luxury real estate broker, and the kind of woman who wears white designer outfits to construction sites. She drives a white BMW, lives in a white mansion, and treats anyone who works with their hands like they're invisible. Caroline had one goal: win the State Community Excellence Award. See, she'd figured out that prestigious neighborhoods sell for higher commissions. A lot higher. And what screams prestige like a 4,000 square foot clubhouse with an infinity pool? Just one problem. The only spot with the right views happened to be my backyard. On a Tuesday morning in March, I came home from a job to find bulldozers in my driveway. Not near my driveway. In it. Caroline stood there in her white heels, clicking across my walkway like she owned the place, supervising as they tore up Sarah's rose garden. The crunch of those rose bushes under the bulldozer treads was the sound of my heart breaking all over again. "Danny!" Caroline called out, sweet as sugar. "I'm so glad you're here. We're building something absolutely beautiful, and it's going to increase your property value significantly." I watched them destroy 18 months of Sarah's careful work in about 18 minutes. "This is my land," I said. "Well, technically, it's community space," Caroline replied, waving some papers. "There was a surveying error in the original development. Don't worry, we'll compensate you fairly for the inconvenience." Fairly. $3,000 for the spot where my wife had fought for her life. That's when I knew Caroline Westfield had picked the wrong widower to mess with. The thing is, I'd learned something important during Sarah's illness. When people think you're weak, when they think grief has broken you, they get careless. They make mistakes. Caroline was about to make a whole lot of them. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. Every angle, every bulldozer, every square foot of destroyed garden. Caroline kept talking about property values and community benefits, but I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. In my experience, the bigger they build their lies, the harder they fall when the truth comes out. I spent that night researching property law instead of sleeping. Emma found me at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by county records and surveyor maps. "Dad, you look terrible," she said, pouring herself a glass of water. "Thanks, sweetheart. Very helpful." "I'm serious. Caroline Westfield's mom called Mrs. Patterson, who told Mrs. Ellis, who told basically everyone at school that you're being difficult about community improvements." Her daughter Brittany keeps asking me why you won't just take their money. 17 years old, and my kid was already dealing with social warfare because I wouldn't roll over for the HOA queen. The next morning, Caroline escalated. I found 3 different violation notices taped to my front door. Commercial vehicles in residential area, property maintenance issues, noise violations. Each one threatened to revoke my business license. Now, I've been parking my work truck in that driveway for 15 years, never had a single complaint. But suddenly, Caroline's HOA board, packed with her country club friends, discovered I was lowering property values with my unsightly business equipment. The noise violation was my favorite. Apparently, starting my truck at 5:30 a.m. constituted disturbing the peace. Never mind that half the neighborhood leaves for work at the same time. I called the city office and got transferred to Tyler Westfield, building inspector, Caroline's brother-in-law. What a coincidence. "Mr. Kowalski," Tyler said, "these are serious violations. We'll need to schedule inspections immediately." "Sure," I said. "But first, I'd like to see the building permits for that clubhouse going up in my backyard." Long pause. "I'll have to get back to you on that." 2 days later, I had my answer. All permits approved, all inspections passed. Tyler had fast-tracked everything through the system in record time. But here's what Tyler didn't know. I'd hired an independent surveyor named Marcus Webb. Cost me $2,000 I didn't have, but Marcus was thorough. He spent 3 days measuring, calculating, and mapping every inch of my property. The results were crystal clear. Caroline's clubhouse foundation extended 15 feet onto my land. Not 2 feet, not 5 feet, 15 feet. That's bigger than most people's bedrooms. I had the smoking gun, but Caroline had the system. Property setback requirements in North Carolina are pretty straightforward. Structures must be minimum 15 feet from property lines. But those rules only matter if the inspector actually enforces them. Here's what I learned about building permits. They're only as honest as the person approving them. When the inspector is the developer's brother-in-law, those rules become more like suggestions. Tyler had approved his sister-in-law's building knowing it was illegal. That made this conspiracy, not incompetence. I called Caroline that evening. "I got the survey results," I told her. "That's wonderful, Danny. I'm sure it confirms what we already know." "It confirms your building is on my land, 15 feet on my land." "Well, I'm sure we can work something out. These things happen." "Yes," I said, listening to the sound of her BMW's engine purring in my driveway as she drove away from her daily inspection. "They certainly do." Caroline had just made her first real mistake. She'd put her crime in writing, signed by her own family member. But she wasn't done digging yet. Escalation loop 1, 568, 800 words. Need 232 more words. The next week, Emma came home from school crying. The dance committee had excluded her from spring formal planning. Apparently, the other moms thought our family drama might affect fundraising. I sat in Sarah's memorial garden that night, what was left of it, and made a decision. Caroline wanted to play social warfare? Fine. But she'd picked the wrong target. See, when you spend 25 years fixing other people's problems, you learn something important. Every system has weak points. Caroline's system was built on corruption and covered up with money. I had the surveyor's report, time-stamped photos, and Tyler's signature on illegal permits. Caroline had wealth and connections. But wealth and connections only work when everyone's playing by the same rules. I was about to change the rules. The metal stakes from Marcus's survey were still scattered across my yard, each one marking exactly where Caroline's foundation violated my property line. They caught the morning sunlight like little metal soldiers, standing guard over Sarah's destroyed roses. Caroline thought documentation was weakness. She was about to learn it was a weapon. Caroline's next move came exactly 1 week later. Certified mail, return receipt requested. The HOA was fining me $150 per day for architectural violations. My crime? Storing unsightly business equipment where it could be seen from the street. My business equipment consisted of one work trailer with a rusty hitch and a small cement mixer, both legally parked in my own driveway, both there for 15 years without complaint. But Caroline had discovered the nuclear option, HOA covenants. According to the fine print I'd never bothered reading, the HOA board had authority to levy daily fines for covenant violations. Those fines could accumulate until they exceeded my property value, then trigger foreclosure proceedings. 6 weeks later, the fines totaled $6,000. My bank started asking questions about my business loan. Emma started asking questions about why her college fund was shrinking. I started asking questions about whether Sarah would forgive me for destroying our daughter's future over some dead roses. Caroline made sure I knew exactly what she thought about my situation. She started taking daily property inspections of the clubhouse construction. Always wearing white gloves, always carrying a clipboard, always taking photos of my violations like she was documenting evidence for court. I watched her photograph my rusty trailer hitch like it was a public health hazard. She actually got down on her hands and knees in that white pantsuit, snapping pictures of rust spots. The woman was thorough, I'll give her that. But thoroughness works both ways. I spent my evenings in the county records office, learning everything I could about building codes and zoning regulations. The clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, started keeping coffee on for me. "You building something, Mr. Kowalski?" she asked one night. "No, ma'am, tearing something down." That's when I found Caroline's second mistake. The clubhouse didn't just violate property lines, it violated setback requirements from the street and wetland buffer zones and height restrictions for structures near power lines. Tyler had approved a building that broke 3 different laws, not just one. Building code violations and zoning violations are handled by different agencies with different penalties. Code violations get you fines. Zoning violations get your building condemned. Translation: Tyler broke 3 different laws, approving his sister-in-law's dream facility. But here's the thing that kept me up at night. I couldn't find the original environmental impact study. Every construction project near wetlands requires one. Tyler's files showed it was submitted and approved, but the actual document was nowhere in the public records. I started making phone calls. The environmental consulting firm listed on Tyler's paperwork had never heard of Meadowbrook Estates. The wetlands specialist whose signature appeared on the approval had been dead for 2 years. Caroline's beautiful clubhouse was built on forged environmental clearances. Emma found me at the kitchen table again, this time surrounded by environmental regulations and wetland protection laws. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson says her daughter overheard Caroline telling people you're an unreliable contractor. 2 of your regular clients canceled this week. Professional sabotage. Caroline was trying to destroy my business because I wouldn't roll over for her property theft." "Emma, can you sit down for a minute? Are we going to lose the house?" "Not if I can help it." "But what if you can't help it? What if we have to move? What if I have to change schools senior year?" I looked at my 17-year-old daughter who'd already lost her mother and now faced losing her home because some rich woman wanted a prettier view from her infinity pool. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I called Marcus Webb, my surveyor, and asked him to expand his research, not just property lines, everything. Environmental surveys, wetland boundaries, protected species habitats, the works. "That's going to cost you, Danny." "How much?" "Another $3,000. I had exactly $3,200 left in my savings account. Sarah's emergency fund, untouched since her funeral. Do it. Because sometimes you have to risk everything to save what matters most. Escalation Loop 2, 695, 800 words. Need 105 more words. 3 days later, Marcus called with news that made my hands shake. "Danny, you need to see this. Caroline's clubhouse isn't just on your land. It's sitting on top of a federally protected salamander habitat. Underground spring system, endangered species, the whole 9 yards." I drove to his office and stared at the 1963 federal survey he'd found in the state archives. Clear as day. Blue Ridge salamander critical habitat protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. Caroline hadn't just stolen my land. She'd committed a federal environmental crime, and Tyler had helped her cover it up. Caroline must have sensed the walls closing in, because her next offer arrived with flowers, actual flowers, white roses delivered to my front door with a handwritten note. "Let's put this behind us. $15,000 final settlement. Fresh start for everyone. 15 grand. For my land, my wife's memorial garden, and my promise to relocate my business outside Meadowbrook Estates." Caroline wanted me gone permanently. The roses went straight in the trash. White roses for a memorial garden where my wife had planted red ones. But Caroline's pressure campaign was working. 3 more clients canceled that week. Emma came home from school, quiet and withdrawn. The dance committee exclusion was just the beginning. Now parents were telling their kids to avoid the troubled family. One afternoon I found Emma crying in her room. "Brittany Westfield told everyone at lunch that you're trying to sue her mom because you're broke and desperate," she sobbed. "She said you're just looking for easy money because you can't handle mom being gone." I sat on the edge of Emma's bed watching my daughter's social life crumble because I wouldn't surrender to Caroline's intimidation. "Do you want me to take their money?" I asked. "I don't know. I just want this to be over. I want to be normal again." Normal. We hadn't been normal since Sarah's diagnosis 3 years ago. That night, I sat in what remained of the memorial garden. The bulldozers had left deep ruts in the soil, and weeds were already sprouting where Sarah's David Austin roses had bloomed. The smell of diesel fuel lingered in the earth. I almost called Caroline's lawyer to accept the settlement. Almost. Then I remembered Marcus's environmental survey. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos he'd sent. Federal documents dating back to 1963, clearly marking the underground spring system that fed the salamander habitat. Caroline knew about this. She had to know. I called the environmental consulting firm whose forged signature appeared on her impact study. The receptionist confirmed what I suspected. They'd never worked on any project in Meadowbrook Estates. "Can you check your records for a Dr. William Henderson?" I asked. "Dr. Henderson passed away in 2019, sir. His signature hasn't been valid for over 2 years. Caroline had used a dead man's signature to approve environmental destruction. The next morning brought a breakthrough that changed everything. My neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, knocked on my door carrying a mason jar full of cloudy brown water. "Danny, something's wrong with our well," she said. "Started tasting funny about 6 months ago, right after they began construction." I held the jar up to the light. The water looked like chocolate milk and smelled like pool chemicals. "Have you had it tested?" "Can't afford testing, but my husband's been getting sick every morning for weeks." 6 months ago, right when Caroline's crew cracked the underground spring system with their foundation work. The Federal Clean Water Act doesn't just protect endangered species, it protects drinking water sources. Contaminating someone's well isn't just environmental destruction, it's a federal crime that can send you to prison. Caroline's infinity pool was literally poisoning my neighbors with chlorinated runoff. I called Marcus Webb immediately. "Marcus, I need you to test water samples from the neighborhood wells." "That's not really my area, Danny. It's about to become everyone's area." 3 days later, Marcus delivered test results that made my blood boil. Mrs. Ellis's well showed dangerous levels of chlorine, construction chemicals, and bacteria. The spring that had provided clean water for 60 years was now a contamination source flowing directly from Caroline's illegal construction. Here's what I learned about the Federal Clean Water Act. It doesn't care about local politics, corrupt inspectors, or HOA covenants. When you contaminate drinking water sources, the EPA gets involved. And when the EPA gets involved, local cronies can't protect you. Translation: Caroline had just escalated from property theft to federal environmental crime. I had photographs of the contamination source, water test results, and proof of forged environmental documents. Caroline had a beautiful clubhouse sitting on top of a crime scene. But the best part? She still didn't know I knew. That evening, Caroline made her final mistake. She called me directly. "Danny, I hear you're stirring up trouble with the neighbors about their water." "Just helping folks figure out why their wells went bad." "Well, I'm sure it's just coincidence. Construction sites always cause temporary issues." "Temporary?" "Of course. Once we finish construction and landscape everything properly, I'm sure any minor water issues will resolve themselves." She'd just admitted knowledge of the contamination and intent to cover it up, on a recorded phone line. Game over, Caroline. I hung up the phone and immediately called the environmental lawyer Marcus had recommended. Caroline thought she was dealing with a broken-down widower who'd roll over for enough money. She was about to discover she'd picked a fight with federal environmental law. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, Caroline's own email. Emma had mentioned that Brittany Westfield was bragging about her mother's business connections and how they handled problems quietly. Teenage gossip, but it got me thinking. Caroline's confidence wasn't just arrogance, it was based on something concrete. I convinced Mrs. Ellis to file a formal complaint about her contaminated well, not with the city, with the EPA. Federal environmental crimes bypass local corruption entirely. 2 weeks later, EPA investigator Sarah Rodriguez, no relation to the county clerk, knocked on my door. She was young, thorough, and completely unimpressed by local politics. Mr. Kowalski, we're investigating potential Clean Water Act violations in your neighborhood. I understand you have documentation. I handed over everything. Marcus's survey, water test results, photos of the contaminated spring, and Tyler's signed permits approving construction over protected wetlands. Sarah's expression darkened as she reviewed the evidence. Mr. Kowalski, these are serious federal violations. Clean Water Act penalties start at $55,000 per day, plus mandatory habitat restoration costs, $55 grand per day, for 6 months of violations. But here's what really concerns me, Sarah continued. Your building inspector approved construction over federally protected habitat using forged environmental clearances. That suggests coordination between multiple parties. She pulled out her phone and showed me an email chain the EPA had subpoenaed from the city's servers. Caroline Westfield to Tyler Westfield, dated 6 months ago. Tyler, need environmental clearance fast-tracked for clubhouse project. Henderson's old signature should work fine. Nobody checks those old studies anyway. We'll handle your consulting fee as discussed. C. Tyler's response, consider it done. $10K covers my risk premium. Caroline had bribed her own brother-in-law to use a dead environmental consultant's signature to approve illegal construction over endangered species habitat. The EPA doesn't negotiate with environmental criminals. They prosecute them. What happens now? I asked. Now, we build a federal case. Clean Water Act violations, Endangered Species Act violations, conspiracy to defraud federal agencies. Caroline Westfield is looking at 18 months in federal prison and complete financial restitution for environmental damages. For the first time in 18 months, I smiled like I meant it. Sarah continued. Federal environmental cases override all local authority. Local police, local judges, local politics, none of that matters. This goes straight to federal court. Caroline's entire power structure was built on local connections and corrupt relationships. She'd never faced an opponent she couldn't buy, bully, or manipulate through social pressure. The United States Environmental Protection Agency doesn't care about country club memberships. There's one more thing, Sarah said. EPA enforcement requires immediate cessation of harmful activity. If the court finds violations occurred, the structure causing environmental damage must be removed immediately. Immediate removal of a $4 million clubhouse. Caroline thought she was untouchable because she'd captured the local system, but she'd just learned the difference between local corruption and federal law. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Caroline was no longer the predator, she was the prey. Emma found me that night actually laughing while reviewing environmental law statutes. Dad, are you okay? You look almost happy. Emma, do you remember what your mother used to say about bullies? That they only pick on people who can't fight back. Right. Well, Caroline Westfield just discovered I brought backup. I showed Emma the EPA case file. Her eyes widened as she read the potential penalties: criminal charges, federal prison time, complete financial restitution, permanent environmental monitoring. Dad, this is huge. Your mother would have loved this part. She always said justice finds a way. For 6 months, Caroline had held all the cards: money, connections, social pressure, legal manipulation. She'd systematically destroyed my business, my daughter's social life, and my wife's memorial garden. But she'd made one catastrophic error. She'd assumed local corruption could protect her from federal law. The EPA investigator had given me something Caroline's money couldn't buy: weapons she couldn't defend against. Tomorrow, I'd start planning Caroline's downfall. Sarah Rodriguez became my secret weapon. The EPA investigator met me at a coffee shop 20 miles outside Meadowbrook Estates, away from Caroline's social surveillance network. Here's how federal environmental enforcement works, Sarah explained, spreading documents across our table. EPA issues a formal violation notice. Violators have 30 days to respond. If they don't comply voluntarily, we seek federal court injunction ordering immediate corrective action. Immediate corrective action. That meant demolition. What kind of timeline are we looking at? EPA violations get priority treatment in federal court. Judge Williams handles environmental cases. She's not sympathetic to wealthy defendants who think money buys exemptions from federal law. I pulled out my notebook and started taking detailed notes. After 25 years of plumbing work, I'd learned that successful projects require careful planning. What about financial damages? Sarah consulted her case file. Habitat restoration for endangered salamanders runs about $600,000. Property damage to your land, another $300,000. Punitive damages for willful violations. She paused. Courts typically award triple damages for environmental crimes involving bribery. Triple damages. That put total restitution around $1.2 million, the exact amount that would let me rebuild Emma's college fund, expand my business, and create something positive from Caroline's destruction. Sarah, I need to ask something important. When the court orders that clubhouse demolished, who removes it? Property owner's responsibility. They hire contractors to safely dismantle the structure. What if I'm a licensed demolition contractor who volunteers to do the work for free? Sarah's smile was everything I needed to know. That afternoon, I drove my excavator to Meadowbrook Estates for the first time in weeks. I parked it strategically on my property, 40 feet from Caroline's illegal clubhouse foundation. Close enough to send a message, far enough to stay legal. Caroline appeared within minutes, marching across her perfect lawn in white designer heels. Danny, what is that thing doing here? It's my equipment, on my property, perfectly legal. It's unsightly and inappropriate for this neighborhood. I patted the excavator's steel arm affectionately. This beauty can tear down a 4,000 square foot structure in about 6 hours, safely and efficiently. Caroline's face went pale. Are you threatening me? No, ma'am. Just sharing technical information about controlled demolition procedures. The next week, I began preparing for what I privately called Operation Restoration. Every detail mattered because I'd only get one chance to do this right. Federal environmental cases require extensive documentation. I organized everything: property surveys, water contamination tests, Tyler's corrupt permits, Caroline's bribery emails, EPA violation notices. Every document time-stamped, photographed, and backed up in 3 locations. Marcus Webb helped me map the underground spring system so we could restore natural water flow after removing Caroline's foundation. The springs had fed clean water to the neighborhood for 60 years before Caroline's construction cracked them. My lawyer, Jennifer Martinez, specialized in federal environmental cases and worked pro bono for victims of corporate environmental crimes. She explained how Clean Water Act enforcement worked: 30 days notice, federal court hearing, immediate injunction if violations proved. Danny, you need to understand something, Jennifer said. When federal court orders a structure removed from protected habitat, there's no appeal process, no delays, no negotiations. Demolition happens immediately. How immediately? Same day as the court order. I started timing everything carefully. How long to fuel the excavator, how long to position it for optimal demolition angles, how long to safely bring down the structure without damaging the underground spring system. 6 hours. I could tear down Caroline's monument to corruption in 6 hours. But timing wasn't just about demolition. It was about maximum psychological impact. Jennifer discovered that Caroline had scheduled a grand opening party for the clubhouse the same week as our federal court hearing. 200 guests, including the mayor and State Community Excellence Award judges. Jennifer, can you make sure our court hearing happens the same day as Caroline's party? That's an unusual request. Well, Caroline spent 6 months humiliating my family in public. It's time to return the favor. The final piece involved my neighbors. Mrs. Ellis's contaminated well was just the beginning. I spent 2 weeks knocking on doors, testing water, and documenting contamination throughout the neighborhood. 12 families had contaminated wells. All contamination traced directly to Caroline's construction site. When EPA investigator Sarah Rodriguez saw the scope of the contamination, her expression hardened. Mr. Kowalski, this isn't just environmental destruction, it's a public health emergency. 12 families drinking contaminated water for 6 months. What does that mean legally? It means Caroline Westfield just escalated from environmental violation to federal crime against public health. Prison time went from 18 months to 5 years. By the end of the month, I had everything in position. Federal environmental case, demolition equipment, community support, media contacts, and legal documentation proving 6 months of systematic environmental crimes. Caroline was hosting her grand opening party to celebrate completing an illegal structure built on stolen land over protected habitat using forged permits approved through bribery that contaminated drinking water for 12 families. She had no idea what was coming. Caroline must have sensed something was wrong because her next move was pure desperation disguised as generosity. She called me on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing EPA documentation with Jennifer. Danny, I've been thinking about our situation and I realize we've gotten off on the wrong foot. What if we could find a solution that benefits everyone? I'm listening. I'd like to offer you $100,000 to withdraw any complaints you may have filed. Clean slate, fresh start, no hard feelings. $100,000, 10 times her original insulting offer. That's very generous, Caroline. I think it's fair compensation for any inconvenience you've experienced. Plus, I'd be willing to put in a good word with some contractors I know. Help you rebuild your client base. She was offering to bribe me with stolen money to cover up federal crimes. Can I think about it? Of course, but I'd need an answer by Monday. We're having our grand opening celebration this weekend, and I'd love to announce that all neighborhood concerns have been resolved. Perfect. Caroline was scheduling her party for the exact same weekend as our federal court hearing. I hung up and immediately called Jennifer. Caroline just offered me a $100,000 bribe to withdraw EPA complaints. Did you record the conversation? Every word. Excellent. Attempted bribery of federal witnesses adds another felony to her charges. The next day brought even better news. FBI Special Agent Michael Torres knocked on my door with a warrant to search Caroline's financial records. Mr. Kowalski, EPA violations involving bribery trigger federal corruption investigations. We're examining cash payments between Caroline Westfield and city officials. How can I help? Just keep doing what you're doing. Document everything, save all communications, and let us build the case. Agent Torres was tall, professional, and completely immune to local politics. He'd spent 10 years investigating white-collar environmental crimes. Sir, can I ask about timing? Caroline's planning a big celebration this weekend. Timing is everything in federal cases. We coordinate arrests with maximum impact for deterrent effect. What does that mean? It means Caroline Westfield will be in federal custody before her party ends. That afternoon, Tyler Westfield appeared at my door. Caroline's brother-in-law looked terrible, pale, sweating, nervous. Danny, we need to talk. Sure, Tyler, come on in. Look, I know there might be some irregularities with the clubhouse permits. Irregularities. Caroline pressured me to fast-track approvals, said it was for the good of the community. I didn't realize there might be environmental issues. Tyler was trying to flip on Caroline to save himself. Tyler, you signed permits approving construction over federally protected habitat using a dead man's signature. Caroline told me the environmental study was legitimate. She said Dr. Henderson had approved it before he passed away. You took $10,000 to falsify federal documents. Tyler's face crumpled. How did you know about the money? EPA has all your emails. Oh God, what do I do? Call the FBI, cooperate fully, hope they give you credit for coming forward. Tyler left my house a broken man. Caroline's entire corruption network was collapsing, but Caroline wasn't finished fighting. Saturday morning, 2 days before the federal court hearing, I woke up to find my excavator's hydraulic lines cut. Professional sabotage designed to disable my equipment right before I'd need it most. I called Agent Torres. Obstruction of federal environmental enforcement, he said grimly. That's another felony. Caroline's really determined to destroy her life completely. Can you prove she did it? We don't have to. Her cell phone puts her in your neighborhood at 3 a.m. That's enough for conspiracy charges. I spent Saturday rebuilding the hydraulic system while Caroline hosted her pre-party social events. She was telling everyone that the neighborhood difficulties had been resolved and the Community Excellence Award was practically guaranteed. Emma helped me repair the excavator, handing me tools and keeping me company. Dad, aren't you nervous about Monday? Nervous? No. Excited? Absolutely. What's the difference? Nervous is when you don't know what's going to happen. Excited is when you know exactly what's going to happen, and it's going to be beautiful. Sunday evening, Jennifer called with final confirmation. Danny, federal court hearing tomorrow at 9 a.m. EPA injunction, immediate demolition order, full financial restitution. Caroline's grand opening party is scheduled for 11 a.m. Perfect timing. She has no idea what's coming. Caroline thinks she's about to celebrate her greatest triumph. Instead, she's about to watch her empire crumble in real time. I spent Sunday night fueling the excavator, checking every system and preparing for the most satisfying 6 hours of work in my entire career. Caroline's party was about to become my demolition celebration. Monday morning brought Caroline's final, most desperate move. At 7 a.m., exactly 2 hours before our federal court hearing, she arrived at my house with an emergency HOA board resolution. "Danny," she called out, pounding on my front door. "Emergency HOA meeting. Your presence is required immediately." I opened the door to find Caroline flanked by 3 board members, all holding official-looking documents. "What's this about, Caroline?" "The HOA board has voted to exercise emergency eminent domain authority. Your property poses an immediate public safety hazard and must be seized for community protection." Eminent domain. Caroline was trying to steal my entire house to stop the federal court hearing. On what grounds? Your illegal business operations, unsightly equipment storage, and potential environmental contamination from your septic system. The irony was breathtaking. Caroline, who'd actually contaminated the neighborhood's water supply, was claiming my property was environmentally dangerous. "Caroline, federal court starts in 2 hours. This won't work." "Federal court? I don't know what you're talking about. This is a local matter handled by local authorities." She genuinely believed local corruption could override federal environmental law. Board member Patricia Morrison, who'd never spoken to me before in her life, stepped forward with fake concern. "Danny, we're prepared to offer you fair market value for your property. $300,000 closing today. $300,000 for a house worth $450. Plus they'd get to stop federal prosecution of their board president. And if I refuse? Emergency eminent domain doesn't require owner consent," Caroline said smugly. "City council meeting this afternoon. Foreclosure proceedings begin tomorrow." Caroline had packed the city council with her country club friends. She thought she could steal my house the same way she'd stolen my backyard. But she'd made one critical error. She'd forgotten about Agent Torres. I pulled out my phone and called the FBI. "Agent Torres, Caroline Westfield just threatened to seize my house to prevent federal court testimony. That's witness intimidation and obstruction of federal proceedings, both felonies. What should I do?" "Document everything. We'll handle it." 20 minutes later, 3 FBI vehicles pulled up to my house. Agent Torres stepped out carrying handcuffs. "Caroline Westfield, you're under arrest for witness intimidation, obstruction of federal environmental enforcement, and conspiracy to defraud federal agencies." Caroline's face went white as Agent Torres read her rights. "This is ridiculous. I'm exercising legitimate HOA authority." "Ma'am, attempting to seize a federal witness's property to prevent court testimony is a federal crime." The other board members scattered like cockroaches when lights come on. Patricia Morrison was in her BMW before the handcuffs clicked shut. "Agent Torres," I said, "Caroline's husband is her lawyer. Shouldn't someone contact him?" "Already tried. Thomas Westfield is also in federal custody. Conspiracy charges related to the same environmental crimes." Caroline's entire power structure had collapsed in one morning, but the best part was yet to come. At 9 a.m. sharp, I sat in federal district court watching Judge Williams review EPA evidence. Caroline appeared in an orange jumpsuit, having spent the previous night in federal lockup. "Ms. Westfield," Judge Williams said, "EPA investigation has documented extensive violations of the Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act, compounded by bribery and falsification of federal documents." Caroline's public defender looked overwhelmed. Federal environmental crimes aren't usually defended by overworked local attorneys. "Your Honor, my client maintains this was a misunderstanding about local permitting procedures." Judge Williams was not impressed. "Counselor, your client bribed a city official to use a deceased environmental consultant's forged signature to approve construction over federally protected endangered species habitat, resulting in contamination of drinking water supplies for 12 families. Your Honor, this court hereby orders immediate cessation of all harmful activity. The structure causing environmental damage must be removed within 24 hours. Immediate removal of Caroline's $4 million clubhouse. Furthermore, this court awards full environmental restitution in the amount of $1,200,000 to compensate the plaintiff for property damage, habitat restoration, and punitive damages. $1.2 million. Exactly what I'd calculated during planning. Judge Williams looked directly at me. "Mr. Kowalski, you're licensed for commercial demolition. Are you prepared to safely remove this structure from protected environmental habitat?" "Yes, Your Honor." "I can begin immediately." "Excellent. Federal marshals will supervise demolition to ensure compliance with EPA restoration requirements." I walked out of federal court with legal authorization to tear down Caroline's clubhouse. Caroline walked out in handcuffs, facing 5 years in federal prison. But the day wasn't over yet. Caroline's grand opening party was scheduled to begin in 1 hour at the clubhouse I was now legally required to demolish. This was about to become the most spectacular party crash in Meadowbrook Estates history. At 11 a.m., exactly as scheduled, 200 of Meadowbrook Estates' finest residents gathered at Caroline's clubhouse for the grand opening celebration. Mayor Davidson was there, along with State Community Excellence Award judges, local business leaders, and every country club member who'd supported Caroline's corruption. They had no idea their hostess was sitting in federal lockup. I arrived at 11:15, driving my excavator slowly down the main road with federal marshals escorting me. The sound of that diesel engine rumbling through the neighborhood was like thunder announcing Judgment Day. The party guests were sipping champagne on the clubhouse patio when they noticed heavy machinery approaching. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as I positioned the excavator 40 feet from their celebration. "Excuse me," Mayor Davidson called out, hurrying over in his expensive suit. "You can't operate construction equipment during a community event." Federal Marshal Janet Cooper stepped forward with official documentation. "Sir, this is federal court-ordered environmental remediation. Please clear the area immediately." "Federal court? There must be some mistake. This is a neighborhood party." "No mistake, sir. This structure was built illegally over federally protected endangered species habitat. Court order requires immediate removal." The champagne glasses went silent. I climbed down from the excavator and walked to the clubhouse entrance, where 200 pairs of eyes stared at me like I'd crashed their private universe. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "by order of Federal District Judge Williams, this structure must be removed immediately to protect endangered salamander habitat and restore contaminated groundwater." Patricia Morrison, who'd threatened to seize my house 8 hours earlier, stepped forward with fake authority. "This is preposterous. Caroline Westfield is our HOA president. She would never—" "Caroline Westfield is in federal custody," Marshal Cooper interrupted, "charged with environmental crimes, bribery, and witness intimidation." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Half these people had contributed to Caroline's legal defense fund just last week. Judge Harrison from the State Awards Committee looked mortified. "Are you saying our Community Excellence Award finalist is a federal criminal?" "Ma'am, your finalist contaminated drinking water for 12 families to build an illegal structure on stolen land using forged environmental permits approved through bribery." The awards judge fainted. I pulled out my camera and started documenting the scene. 200 wealthy residents suddenly discovering their community leader was an environmental criminal. The look of betrayal on their faces was priceless. "Everyone needs to clear the area immediately," I announced. "Demolition begins in 15 minutes." Most guests fled like the clubhouse was on fire, but about 50 people stayed, positioning themselves at safe distances to watch Caroline's empire crumble. Emma arrived just as I fired up the excavator. She'd driven over from school with 3 friends, all wanting to witness history. "Dad, are you really going to tear down that whole building?" "Every square foot, sweetheart. Federal court orders." I climbed back into the operator's seat and positioned the excavator's arm against Caroline's beautiful infinity pool. The first crack in the concrete sounded like a gunshot echoing across the neighborhood. The crowd gasped. Channel 9 News arrived just as I started dismantling the pool deck. Reporter Lisa Chang set up her camera with the perfect angle, demolished luxury structure in the background, federal marshals supervising, shocked residents watching their corrupt paradise collapse. This is Lisa Chang reporting from Meadowbrook Estates, where a federal court has ordered immediate demolition of a luxury clubhouse built illegally over endangered species habitat. I worked methodically, bringing down Caroline's monument to corruption one section at a time. The infinity pool collapsed first, sending thousands of gallons of chlorinated water flooding across the artificial landscaping. When the main structure started coming down, you could hear the timber beams snapping like bones breaking. Caroline had spared no expense building her dream facility. Imported marble, custom millwork, Italian tile, all of it reduced to rubble by my 30-year-old excavator. The most satisfying moment came when I exposed the underground spring system Caroline had tried to destroy. Clear, cold water bubbled up through the cracked foundation, washing away 6 months of contamination. Mrs. Ellis stood at the edge of the work area, watching clean water flow for the first time since Caroline's construction began. "Danny," she called out, "look, the spring's running clear again." The neighborhood residents who'd stayed to watch began applauding. Not for the demolition, for the restoration. Tyler Westfield appeared just as I finished tearing down the main structure. Caroline's brother-in-law looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. "Danny, I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Tyler, you took money to approve illegal construction over protected habitat. People could have died drinking contaminated water." "I know. FBI says I might avoid prison if I cooperate fully with their investigation. Good luck with that." By 4 p.m., Caroline's $4 million clubhouse was completely demolished. 6 hours of controlled destruction, exactly as planned. The crowd that remained burst into spontaneous applause as I shut down the excavator. Federal marshals documented the complete restoration of natural water flow through the salamander habitat. Lisa Chang interviewed me while standing in the ruins of Caroline's corruption. "Mr. Kowalski, how does it feel to tear down a structure that caused you so much grief?" "Ma'am, this was never about revenge. This was about protecting my wife's memory, my daughter's future, and my community's environment." What's next for Meadowbrook Estates? Next, we rebuild this community the right way, with integrity. 6 months later, Emma and I sat in Sarah's restored memorial garden, watching crystal-clear spring water bubble up through natural stone channels we'd built to honor the salamander habitat. The federal court case wrapped up faster than anyone expected. Caroline pled guilty to all charges and received 18 months in federal prison plus full financial restitution. Tyler cooperated with authorities and got probation, but lost his city job permanently. The $1.2 million settlement covered everything: property damage, environmental restoration, Emma's college fund, and expansion of my demolition business. I hired 3 employees, bought new equipment, and started specializing in environmental remediation work. Caroline's white BMW was repossessed 2 weeks after her conviction. Her luxury house went into foreclosure when legal fees consumed her trust fund. Last I heard, she was working at a discount furniture store in Charlotte, banned from real estate for life. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA dissolved completely. Residents voted to form a voluntary neighborhood association with common sense rules and transparent budgets. They asked me to serve as advisor, helping prevent future corruption. Our first community project was establishing an annual salamander festival to celebrate environmental conservation. We raised $15,000 for wetlands education programs at local schools. Emma organized the whole event as her senior project. The State Community Excellence Award went to a neighborhood in Asheville that actually followed environmental laws. Judge Harrison sent a personal apology for not researching Caroline's background more thoroughly. Mrs. Ellis's well water tested clean for the first time in 2 years. 11 other families also had their water supplies completely restored. The EPA designated our underground spring system as a model for community-based environmental protection. Emma thrived in the aftermath. Her classmates went from avoiding our troubled family to respecting her father's environmental victory. She started an environmental club at school and won a full scholarship to study environmental law at UNC. "Dad," she said one evening as we planted new David Austin roses, "I think Mom would be proud of what you did." "I think she'd be proud of what we did. You stood by me when things got tough." "When I first heard about the lawsuit, I thought you were just being stubborn about some dead flowers. And now? Now I understand. You weren't fighting for roses. You were fighting for what's right." The memorial garden bloomed more beautifully than ever. Sarah's favorite varieties thrived in soil that was finally free from contamination. The scent of those roses on summer mornings could still transport you to an English countryside, exactly as Sarah had intended. I established the Sarah Kowalski Environmental Protection Scholarship at our community college. $5,000 annually for students studying environmental science or conservation, funded entirely by Caroline's restitution money. The scholarship's first recipient was a young woman whose family had been poisoned by industrial contamination in their rural community. She reminded me of Emma, smart, determined, and committed to protecting others from environmental criminals. My demolition business expanded beyond my wildest expectations. Word spread about the Meadowbrook Estates case, and property owners throughout North Carolina started calling for help with illegal construction problems. I developed expertise in environmental compliance and habitat restoration. 3 years later, I testified before the state legislature about strengthening environmental enforcement. The bill passed unanimously and became known as the Clean Water Protection Act. Caroline's crimes had created precedent for prosecuting environmental corruption. Tyler Westfield works at a hardware store now, helping weekend DIYers pick out screws and paint. He nods when he sees me but doesn't try to make conversation. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Emma graduated valedictorian and headed to law school with a full ride. Her acceptance essay described watching her father fight federal environmental crimes with nothing but determination and an excavator. My father taught me that ordinary people can defeat powerful criminals when they're willing to document the truth and never give up, she wrote. Environmental justice isn't about having money or connections. It's about having courage. Last month, a young couple bought Caroline's foreclosed mansion for half its original value. They knocked on my door to introduce themselves and ask about neighborhood environmental protection measures. Mr. Kowalski, the husband said, we heard you're the person to talk to about keeping our community environmentally responsible. Just call me Danny, and yes, I'm happy to help. They were good people, a teacher and a nurse, committed to raising their kids in a neighborhood that valued integrity over status symbols. I spent an hour explaining groundwater protection, wetlands conservation, and the importance of legitimate environmental permits. They took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions. Is there anything we should watch out for? The wife asked. Just remember, I told them, when someone in authority tells you that environmental laws don't apply to them, that's when you call the EPA. Emma visits every weekend, often bringing law school friends who want to hear the story of how a widowed plumber defeated federal environmental criminals with an excavator and a camera. The story always ends the same way, with all of us sitting in Sarah's memorial garden, listening to clean spring water flowing through restored salamander habitat, surrounded by roses that bloom more beautifully because they're finally growing in soil that's free from corruption. Sarah would have loved seeing justice restore the environment she cared so much about protecting. But here's the most important part of this story. Caroline Westfield wasn't unique. Environmental criminals operate in communities everywhere, counting on victims being too intimidated or too poor to fight back. If you're dealing with environmental destruction in your community, document everything. Contact the EPA. Find allies who've been hurt the same way. And remember, federal environmental law doesn't care about local politics. Speaking of community stories, next week I'm sharing how I helped my neighbor discover his HOA president was embezzling $300,000 from community funds. Another case of documentation, patience, and heavy machinery solving problems that lawyers couldn't touch. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments. I read every single one, and some of them might become future episodes. And subscribe for more stories about ordinary people defeating corrupt authority figures who think money and connections put them above the law. Remember, when bullies have power and politicians have price tags, sometimes justice comes with hydraulic arms and diesel engines.